Well, it's great to be here. So first of all, thanks to Startup Grind for having us. And this is a really interesting opportunity for the two of us. We've worked together a bit over the years, and Rock Health has certainly been an investor in a number of digital health startups. But this is a neat chance to just talk about what it's like to be an entrepreneur in digital health, and what are the parameters, what's the experience like, and you've been a serial entrepreneur both outside of digital health and now in digital health. So maybe if we could start, Christine, with just you, your background, sort of all the work that you've done as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure. How many in the room are digital health entrepreneurs, or maybe would-be digital health entrepreneurs? Okay, great. And any folks that work in healthcare industry in the room? A handful? Okay, great. That helps calibrate a little bit.
Pretty good number.
Yeah, it's a great number. I am heartened by all the would-be digital health entrepreneurs in the audience. Go forth and conquer. The healthcare system is at a unique point in its history, obviously, with change of administration and change of healthcare policy, so who knows what's going to happen next. But what we do know is when big changes happen in industries, just like when the ACA came into play, it's a great time to jump in and take advantage of some of the ways that big organizations in the system have to switch in order to find the right incentives and pursue their business objectives. That's a lot of garble. Let me start with my background, I guess, as Bill mentioned. So I've started a couple different companies prior to this one, mostly in the predictive analytics space, so using lots of what we call behavior data to predict what people were going to do next, in the aim of hoping to change what they were going to do next. So my prior company, Sense Networks, as the introduction said, was we were looking at a lot of phone location data, call patterns and texting patterns, and creating what are called behavior phenotypes out of people. So it's pretty easy to tell when you have hundreds of millions of people running around the United States, which ones are frequent business travelers, which ones are like the Accenture consultants, versus which ones sort of stay at home more and have the regular 9-to-5 job. And that sort of travel information tells us a lot about who you are as a person and what you might like based on some of those different behavior patterns. And then prior to that, doing some similar things over at Microsoft in the Xbox division, and then also starting starting a company that scraped a lot of product data off the web in order to inform pricing and market strategies for their products and services on places like eBay or e-commerce sites like Amazon.
Yeah, so tons of background in, there's buzzwords for this nowadays. It used to be big data, and then it was machine learning, and now it's AI. But I think of this all as sort of doing math in a business. I guess that's a common thread through all of the work that you've done. Is that fair?
Yeah, it actually used to be AI, and then AI kind of fell short of expectation, and then became, I think, machine learning. And then I think literally Thomas Getz from Wired magazine called it big data, and then now it's back to AI again. So it's all, what's old is new again.
Yeah, that's tech. We just rebrand it and call it something new.
Yeah.
So through all of these different entrepreneurial experiences that you've had within a big company, of course, and then starting your own things with collaborators and co-founders, what's the most surprising or interesting thing that you've encountered?
So along the vector of starting companies, you always feel like the next one's going to be easier, and it never is. It's in fact harder. That's been a surprise.
Why is that?
I think if you were to start a company in the same sector over and over, perhaps it might be easier because you built a personal network in that sector. You've got a team that you know is already familiar with the dynamics of that sector. When you're starting companies in different sectors, like I have, you're facing the wall of like trying to understand an entire industry. And I'll tell you, like, so far, healthcare is the mother lode of them all, in terms of its complexity, in terms of getting lost in the system, in terms of the dancing with elephants, as commonly known as, your first customer is going to be this massive multi-billion-dollar company that if you move in the wrong direction at any given time, they're just going to like squash you and kill you. So healthcare has been the most complex startup so far.
That's like a poster advertisement for starting a digital health startup.
Yeah, sorry. Do your homework.
Why ever did you do it?
Impact. So you can only sell so many, I don't know, shoe ads or cat ads or, You can only monetize people's data to the end of getting them to click on another, backpack on e-bags so much. At some point, you kind of look at all this stuff and go, I want to do something that matters. I want to make an impact on people's lives. And it now is kind of the time where a lot of the technology is in place, and there's a more sophisticated understanding of technology by your customers that you can actually accomplish those things.
Yeah, so it sounds like I want to go back to this thing about switching back and forth as well, because you've picked twice, like the harder choice. One, going to healthcare, but also switching multiple times. Why did you switch between industries or between verticals?
Maybe some context on that is when we first started the company, we thought it would be straightforward. We thought we'd just sell to payers, and we had this this tool that helped payers.
Payers are insurance companies. In the lingo, right?
Yeah, we have this tool that helped them figure out, okay, for these types of people, they're going to respond to this wellness program better, and then we're going to figure out like how well they respond to this wellness program, and look for people like you, and recommend the same thing. So it was like a big recommendation engine. And along the journey, we figured out that actually our market is biopharma companies and people who make therapies, because the market dynamics are shifting, how people are getting paid are shifting. And so we had to pivot into what we view as a larger market, a more interesting market for what we do. Insurance companies think of their problem in one way, and biopharma companies think of it in a completely different way. So even though healthcare is a vertical, within healthcare there are all these sub-verticals, and everybody uses different language within the sub-vertical. Everyone has a different incentive in the little vertical. Everybody views this differently. So an example is a payer will say, oh, your recommendation engine is really cool. We want to embed it into our system and find all these people and recommend them the right programs and services to keep their BMI low, et cetera. And that's great. And we don't care how you do it, just like get it done. Like we don't actually care about the algorithm. We don't care about your system. It's just like get it away. We just want to press a button and it's done. And the biopharma companies treat technology like they treat drug discoveries. And so we're obsessed with the algorithm. Like we want to validate it like 5 times. We want physicians, and we want to see these things called ROC curves. We want to own the IP. So it just becomes a really different product and a really different conversation. It's fascinating, even though it's the same idea.
Maybe we can even just pause a little bit and talk about Evidation as a platform and as a company, because we're sort of getting around the edges of it. Can you describe in a few words, because it'll give great context to some of the specific challenges, and then we can kind of go back to some general things about what you've learned from that. But maybe just a few words. What is Evidation and how does it work?
It's funny because healthcare can be so complex that what we'll say on a stage to a generalized audience is different than what I say in the room with a healthcare person. But what I'll say to a generalized audience is very simple. We figure out what works for whom, when, and how much. And the unique way we figure this out is we aggregate a lot of what we call activity or behavior data from devices, from things you're interacting with on an everyday basis. And so a salient example of this in an insurance company is, they might know a lot about you from your claims data and your member files and from the medications that you're taking, and even from the way that you're engaging with all of their wellness programs. And because they know a little bit about you, they can say, oh, you know what, this company called Omada, which makes a coaching program for pre-diabetics or patients with pre-diabetes, you're going to respond to that really well, but you over here, you need more social support in the real world. Weight Watchers is the thing for you. And so we try to help people sort of optimize some of their different interventions across a population. A biopharma hears that very differently. A pharma company, they want to know things like, oh, you're carrying around your phone all the time. We know that we have an insulin, and we want to give you a program on top of that, drug to make sure that you adhere to that drug to make sure you get better, because now they get paid when you get better, which is really important, actually, and a really important shift that's happened in the market. And so they want us to try and figure out what that thing should be on top. And they have about 50 things to choose from, and they want to know the right things.
Right. So you've got so much expertise in the different pieces of the healthcare system now. You've talked about the payers, insurers, biopharma. You're clearly working with healthcare providers and all of this. Before you started doing all of this, did you have like a graduate degree in how to work with all these different parties? How did you figure this all out?
No,
where did you start?
I'm useless. No. I studied finance in undergrad. I got an MBA in France, which feels like an oxymoron sometimes. No offense to the French folks in the room. And I worked in a lab for a very short time while I was living in France. But this is all self-taught. This is all typical Silicon Valley hacker style. Read as many books as you can, as many papers as you can, et cetera.
So the same methodology that you've used in other verticals, other industries. Is there anything special about healthcare in terms of where you go to find some of these resources, or who you work with, or I mean, for those in the room that haven't yet done their first startup in digital health, where should they go first to?
I mean, they should call you, right? We were just talking about this prior to this chat. The way that so my company, we have 4 co-founders, which violates the Bing Gordon's polygamy rule, but that's okay. We have four co-founders that are all from outside healthcare in. So everybody's backgrounds are like, search engine land, like Google and Ask.com. We have one guy who worked at CERN doing like physics stuff, and FICO, which is like credit scoring. And the way that we got up to speed fast was actually being part of, a program like Rock Health, which this isn't meant to be a commercial about Rock Health, but I'm just saying, like, we knew nothing. Rock Health folks said, here, call these 10 people in healthcare land who have sponsored Rock Health, and we'll sit down with you and just tell you everything about their business. And so that's what we did. We went on a grand listening tour through Rock Health and listened to everybody. And people were really open with us about their problems. And then we're also open to us about correcting all of our language. Like, you would not believe
what does that mean? Or did you use bad words?
Yeah, we would walk in and we'd be like, whiz bang, predictive analytics, whiz bang, like, this or that. Like, it's a miracle. You press a button and look, like, all these emails go out, et cetera. And they're just like, no. This is how we talk about our business. This is how we talk about patients. We talk about endpoints. We don't talk about like results, like engagement. No, we talk about endpoints. We need everything validated. We need data to back up your assertions. You couldn't just like walk into a room and claim something. So learned a lot about how to talk to healthcare folks through that.
So the network is really, it sounds like for you, one distinguishing thing in healthcare and digital health is having that network and building connections throughout the industry across different verticals. Can you talk maybe which of these areas is the easiest and hardest to get into in terms of the learning and the openness? Or did you find that you said there's a lot of openness and folks were willing to talk about their perspective and their problems?
That's a great question.
Or another way to put it, if you had to start over, would you start in the same place?
So the places where people are going to be the most open with you are the places of greatest pain. And so lots of folks are trying to understand, in my world, lots of folks are trying to understand a lot of new types of data are coming. Other industries have been way more sophisticated about using this data for a business outcome. And we just have no idea. We have like no idea where to even begin. And so there's a lot of openness around what problems they're trying to solve, what they think they could solve with new types of data. And so they're very open with us. I would say other areas of extreme pain right now are kind of people trying to understand, in drug companies especially, are trying to not understand necessarily how to invent new drugs. I think they all feel like they have a pretty good handle on some of that. But they're really trying to understand the new world of diagnostics. They're really trying to understand, okay, there are all these like Grail and Freenome, these blood testing companies where you can identify cancer in its very early stages. They're really trying to understand the impact of things like that on their business. If you identify cancer way before you even have any manifestation of cancer in the form of a tumor, what does that mean for a drug company? Like, how do they win in that situation?
Who do you think the most secure incumbents in healthcare are right now? And in terms of as you approach them as a startup as potential customers, or as folks more or less interested in innovation in their business, how does that security affect them?
It's funny because the most insecure people are actually the most innovative people in a way. So just like I said,
So there's like a security
swim towards
meter.
fear. As an entrepreneur, you should always find those points of where they're most afraid of their business. Shifting underneath them is where there's lots of opportunity. I don't find that the companies who are really secure in what they do tend to be more open to looking outside for innovation. And so if you had to like categorize at like is it hospital systems, or is it insurance companies, or is it drug companies? Who has the most fear right now? It's drug companies. I think,
Why is that?
Because the rent is too damn high. Drugs are too expensive, plain and simple. And I think they knew with either incoming administration that was true, that there was going to be some legislation around that. It's probably going to turn out to be true. And so they have to figure out how to operate within that, and fast. So that's going to generate a lot of movement, I think.
Yeah. And then you're just talking about, so the core of your business and the is actually a core issue in healthcare. It's the generation of evidence for or against therapeutic interventions, or for or against programs, wellness, anything that we want to do in healthcare. Evidence is sort of at the foundation level, right? The ground floor of what you need to do to be a successful entrepreneur in at least many parts of healthcare. So one thing that a lot of folks I know feel about evidence healthcare, if they're not in the industry, is that it's really seems like a high wall, a high barrier to overcome to get in. And there's maybe some misunderstandings about that, or maybe that's true. How do you see evidence from an entrepreneur's point of view for your business, for the interventions that others are building?
So the context here is, say I have a program that can miraculously reverse diabetes, and you're doing that by like giving people blood tests in the beginning, and then you're sending them through some sort of coaching program. Maybe it's an AI coaching program, even better. And
that would be buzzword compliant. Then.
Yeah,
on top
then
of
you're
useful.
Then
Right,
you're like
okay.
got all the buzzwords. You've got genetic
And then we'd
testing
invest,
and labs, and then Rock Health will chase you down. So say you have this thing. If you're in any other industry, a lot of times people will just believe you. A lot of times you can like walk in the door, especially in advertising, let's call it, or sometimes even in e-commerce, et cetera. You can walk in the door and people will just sort of look at your background maybe, and they'll just believe you. In healthcare, they don't believe you at all. They're like, yeah, right, show me, where's your data? And your data even has to be structured in like a very different way. And so it's a barrier to entry, so it's great if you can overcome that and invest in what they call evidence in order to prove that your thing works. It's a massive barrier to entry because it's expensive to do. But I think with a lot of these types of things, we're not talking about multi-billion-dollar clinical trials. We're talking about things that can be done in a more lightweight way, can be done virtually, can be recruited virtually, et cetera. And that's something my company has had to get really, really insanely good at, to the point where we open up our platform and offer it to other companies too. But evidence sounds like this big daunting thing. There are lightweight ways to do just right out of the gate, including just take a look at some of your existing data and some of your existing engagement, all the way to running a gold standard randomized clinical trial on your widget. So.
Right. So there's ways to approach the problem that make it tractable, and you kind of have to right size your approach based on what you're trying to solve for.
Based on where you're at and sort of receptivity of the market for, look, if you got miracle AI bot that like solves diabetes, people might give you just a tiny bit of the benefit of the doubt to try it. And if you came from Google DeepMind or something, but other than that, most of them need evidence.
Right. Right. Absolutely. How dissimilar or similar is evidence generation in healthcare than, let's say, tactics that I might have employed at another startup? If I'm in, let's say, advertising business, I'm going to do A/B testing to determine the click-through rate and probably the scroll rate and some other things. But I'm going to do some sophisticated analysis. It may not be called evidence generation. How similar or different are those activities in your mind? And what characterizes the differences?
So the only reason you need evidence, by the way, is to get other people to pay for it. So in healthcare, the way it works is a lot of times consumers don't necessarily, I mean, we all pay. We pay these premiums that our insurance company collects or somebody like our insurance company
Do you
collects.
guys explain how that stuff works, by the way? I still don't understand my insurance plan.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
It turns out very few people do. But
Anyways,
you're
that's
paying
another-
for
that's another
all this
fireside
stuff.
chat.
I mean, that's one of the base learnings going into healthcare is like everything is backwards. It's just kind of weird. We all pay into this pot of money that then they decide what things that you're going to be allowed to use in order to manage your health, which is sort of ironic on some level. But those people, we say pay for stuff. Even though you're paying for it, they're sort of monitoring what gets paid for. And so those people need convincing evidence to get your widget into the population. So if you have this magical diabetes AI bot again, a big insurance company has a bunch of people with diabetes who could benefit from it. They're going to basically be the gate to figure out what AI bots they're going to use, what they're not going to use, et cetera. And so they need a bunch of evidence that's well structured in the form of usually lots of retrospective data or a trial in order to say your AI bot is better than what they call standard of care, which standard of care right now, as you know, is not very much. It's like, here, you got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Here's like a packet of 100 pages of information. Have fun. See you. So.
Right. So there's some transferability to the skill set of a non-healthcare business to the evidence generation activity of a.
Some.
But the fundamental reality is you have to know your audience and know what they're looking for, and then craft the data and the analysis in a way that.
Yeah, I think in tech, Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz wrote a book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And in it, he so beautifully describes what the sales process was like a lot of times for some of these big enterprise cloud installations. It can be summarized by the following. Have PowerPoint, have product. So you go into a client meeting, you show them you have this like big cloud thing with a bunch of stuff, and then your client nods and says, okay, yeah, I want that box, but not this other box. And then all your engineers race. Like you get on the phone with them that day, and they race to build those two boxes. But you've already sold it like it's there. You've already sold it like it exists. It's already there. Healthcare folks will eat you alive if you walk in and show them a bunch of boxes that you don't have without any data to back up your claim.
Right. So I guess in summary, the evidence is a barrier to entry, but it's also a barrier to entry. So if you overcome it and you understand how to do it, you've got a bit of a moat around your business that others have to meet or exceed in order to be competitive with you. So being really good at it is a competitive advantage in healthcare.
Agree.
Whereas it's, not necessarily elsewhere. So there's all this specialization, and it sounds really scary because there's so many pieces to healthcare, and these different stakeholders have different demands and different interests, and sometimes the customer doesn't pay. These are really complicated things. You understand them really well. Your team does. How important is it to have investors around you? How do you go about fundraising with that in mind, I guess, is a really general way to ask this.
So it depends.
Or did you not?
It depends on the bet you're making on this. It's the worst answer in the world. It depends. So there are two main schools of thought in how to approach digital health. One is you are part of the system. You want your thing to be embedded inside a large payer or a large drug company or a large hospital. And you're going to work in close coordination with physicians if you want to be part of a provider ecosystem. And you're going to sell tools that physicians use in order to manage their patients. There's another school of thought that says, screw the system. Just screw it. We're either going to build like an entire insurance company on our own that's tech-enabled and whiz-bangy, and we're going to like run laps around Humana, or we don't need the system at all. The thing that we're doing, we're just going to go direct to consumers and figure it out ourselves. So an orthogonal approach to the system. If you're going to go orthogonal, it better be big, and your best bet is for a tech investor to understand that big orthogonal bet. The problem with that is there are very few tech investors who aren't intimidated by healthcare and really want to make that big orthogonal bet with you. And so that's the risk. If you want to be part of the system, find an investor who at least knows the network well enough to get you in front of that network.
That's great advice. And there's probably the hybrid as well, where you can lever from one into the other. I think. Is there any lesson, you talked about going consumer versus enterprise, and I'm going to ask a business model question embedded in this investor side conversation. So is there anything you've learned or seen across digital health that you can generalize about going direct to consumer versus enterprise? So that was a little bit embedded in your answer about investors as well, I think.
I from time to time make angel investments in companies. I'm looking for big, bold, orthogonal bets to healthcare. Having worked alongside of the system for a long time, that's what my company does. My company is very partnered along the system. I think the exciting opportunities is in big, bold bets orthogonal to the system. This is one of these, like, do as I say, not as I do. My company is definitely being embedded inside the system and creating value for partners along the system, but I'm most excited by the things that are orthogonal.
Interesting. So then I'll ask the opposite, which is in the B2B space in healthcare, right? Not B2C, or the B2B2C. What generalizations, what lessons can you offer to folks who are coming into or want to build a meaningful business that is not an orthogonal bet, but is nonetheless going to really disrupt or transform some aspect through a B2B business model?
I mean, it's all the common sense things. I'm not sure I have anything necessarily unique. It's know your customer, it's get in front of them fast. The one nuance to it, I think, in healthcare specifically, is there's this like really sort of, it's not a cloud exactly, but it's this sort of undercurrent of regulation. So in healthcare, the government makes up a disproportionate amount of the spend and controls a disproportionate amount of the spend. And they also control all the incentives for the entire system. And so not only do you have to know your customers' context and what their objectives are, but you actually have to like dig into the legislation, like read MACRA, read the ACA at the time, read whatever Paul Ryan's Better Way is, and really try to understand it backwards and forwards.
So you turned the conversation to the kind of million, billion, I guess, trillion-dollar question, right? Healthcare is 18% of GDP right now. There's a lot of pressure to squeeze cost out of that system and to sort of flatten the growth within healthcare. How do you view, then when you look at that sort of macro picture right now, how do you translate that? What does that translate into for you as an entrepreneur? Opportunity, concern? Where is that for you?
I just come back to it. The rent is too damn high. Like, people's premiums are too expensive. Like, the healthcare system in general is too expensive. It should not be 18% of GDP. And when you look into the system, you can start to see areas where it's like insane that we spend how much money on the exchange systems. I think we spent like $800 million building a California exchange system, things like that. I don't mean to call out the California folks, but every state has the same story. Why are we paying sort of Oracle and all these big companies like hundreds of millions of dollars for this? It's insane. Like, fix it. Somebody fix it.
Right, so opportunity from your point of view, and to pull cost out of the system, and that the value add is accrues to the entrepreneur who does a really good job of that.
Yeah, totally. I'll take the spread between $800 million and the $80 million it'll actually cost to do it.
Right. I want to go back to just a little bit about your journey in Evidation, and this thing about all of these, stay with the theme of all of these different skills that are needed, all the different stakeholders, right? You are all outsiders in, you said, for all four of your co-founders. What do you think is that a thematic thing for health entrepreneurs, that they're outside in is a better approach? Clearly it's working for you guys. What advice would you give around that? What lessons learned did you guys have? And if I were starting today without background in healthcare, would I be better served to pick somebody who's got that experience to go alongside me? Or?
Yeah, I think a blend is great. I'm glad we added a bunch of really deep healthcare people to our team.
How soon do you have to start thinking about that? Or in your case, how soon?
I would have loved to have thought of it sooner. I think the sooner you can do it. Look, an awesome founding team from my perspective is someone who is a product or salesperson who deeply, deeply, deeply understands healthcare, and then someone who's a deep technologist who has no idea he has no idea what a diagnostic tool is in healthcare. So.
All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Bill.